The longer that Yu-Gi-Oh has gone on, the more Konami has had to put restrictions on how often you can activate certain card effects. There's two great examples of this. There are soft once per turns and hard once per turns. A soft once per turn is basically an effect that can be activated once per turn per copy. A good example of this would be Dragonic Diagram. Dragonic Diagram has a once per turn effect, but if you have 3 Dragonic Diagrams in your hand, you can actually activate each one's effect once that turn, leaving you with 3 searches. So that would be a soft once per turn, which is just once per turn per copy. And then there's cards that are hard once per turns. A good example of this would be like the Unizombie effects. Now, Unizombie does have 2 different effects, but both of them are hard once per turns, which means if you use the Unizombie effect, get rid of it, and then bring back the Unizombie, you can't then use that same effect again. It just counts that effect being a once per turn, no matter how many copies of Unizombie you have or manage to summon in one turn. Those are sort of the 2 big restrictions on card effects, but there's one that I feel is severely underutilized, and that is the once per duel effect. Now, there aren't a lot of cards that have this restriction, and I'll talk about those in a second, but let's first briefly talk about Konami's card design philosophy over the years. When Yu-Gi-Oh! First came out, and for probably 5 to 8 years, really, they really focused on long-term effects, and the best decks that were dominating competition had a whole bunch of effects that you could almost always activate. You didn't have to have certain cards left in deck just to like summon a Yatagarasu or summon a Blackluster Soldier. You just had to have them in your hand. It was pretty straightforward. However, Konami eventually figured out that the way to print more powerful cards was to give them more inconsistencies, which made them better for the short term because they were very high impact, but crippled you in the long term and often hurt your consistency. An early example of this would be Tengu, or Reborn Tengu, I should say, just in case you don't know. Reborn Tengu is an incredibly powerful card if you happen to only open 1 copy of it. However, if you open 2 copies, or God forbid you open 3 copies, you are looking at a really hard battle. Reborn Tengu is sort of one of my earliest examples of this, a card that you really only want to draw 1 copy of going first or second. I mean, when Reborn Tengu came out, it didn't really matter if you're going first or second. You just always wanted 1 copy in your opening hand. It made the game so much easier. But more modern examples of this would be Speedroid Terratop and, of course, Brilliant Fusion, 2 cards that you want to play 3 of in your deck with the only idea of actually resolving 1 copy. With Speedroid Terratop, you often only played 1 copy of Speedroid Takatomborg, and with Brilliant Fusion, you usually only want to play 1 copy of Gemknight Garnet, which means you were entering an event with a deck with 3 copies of a card that you know at maximum you can only activate 1 time, which means if you open multiple copies of the card, your hand is really bad. And also, if you resolve 1 copy and then you draw into the second and third copies, your draws are just really, really bad as well, which means that you're really only focusing on that short-term, high-impact card effects, and that's okay if the game is designed to support that, which for the past 5 or so years, it pretty much has. I don't think this game is entirely decided by your first turn opening, but I do believe that a huge percentage of your win rate is determined by the first turn opening. It is so crucial to have the biggest board you can possibly make on that very first turn, and cards that help you do that are the high impact ones, like Speedroid Terratop and like Brilliant Fusion, which actually led Speedroid Terratop to eventually hit limited status on the Forbidden and Limited list. But there's this third category of cards, the once per duel effect, that I feel Konami is not taking advantage of, which is really sad because I actually feel like these fix so many different problems. So what are the once per duel effects that I've actually seen play? The 2 big ones are plant monsters, Glow Up Bulb and Spore. Both these cards were actually banned at one point. They're currently off the ban list. Well, Glow Up Bulb's limited, Spore's off the ban list. But these cards have seen so much competitive play in such a huge variety of decks, despite the fact that you can only use their effects once per duel. And obviously, that's not once per match, it's just once per game, which is pretty important. I don't think they would actually print a card that you can only use the effect once per match. Seems kind of silly, but they were only once per duel. You can only summon that glow up bulb or summon that spore from the graveyard with their really good effects, I should mention, just once per game, which meant you really had to think about when you wanted to activate those effects. If your opponent had a way to stop them, you were completely screwed, because then they were basically just level 1 normal monster tuners when you first summon them without doing anything in the graveyard. The other card that's a little bit more recent that has a once per duel effect is the Predaplant Cobra card. This is an incredibly powerful card, able to search one of the cards we just talked about, Brilliant Fusion, and the way that you do that is by playing the Predaplant Scorpio card to summon it straight from the deck. Now there's a whole bunch of challenges with this. Not only do you have to only be able to use the Cobra effect once per duel, if you actually draw the Cobra card, Scorpio cannot summon it from the deck anymore, which means that if you draw a Cobra, you have 3 dead cards in your deck, and you've missed out on the once per duel effect. That's huge, and it's a lot more high risk than Glow Up Bulb and Spore, which you don't really care if you draw, and actually in some cases you wanted to draw them, where Predaplant Cobra is pretty much just another Takatomborg or another Garnet, because you don't want to see it in your opening hand, or really at all. So these are like the main 3 once per duel effects, but I feel like Konami is not taking advantage of these. And I feel this way because these effects fix a lot of the problems with modern Yu-Gi-Oh! One of the biggest issues with current Yu-Gi-Oh! Is all the crazy first turn boards that take like 7 minutes to make, and then your opponent just instantly scoops when they draw their 6th card, unless they happen to open a hand trap. Now, spirals are a pretty good example of this, because every single effect in the deck is pretty much not a once per turn effect at all, besides Spiral Double Helix. But Quick Fix and Drone and Resort and all those cards are not hard once per turns, and some of them aren't even soft once per turns, and it's actually just incredible because we really haven't seen a deck that's that overboard in terms of the amount of soft once per turn effects they have. However, you can put that in the context of when they were created, when they weren't very good, even with all those with the lack of restrictions that they had on them, they still weren't meta until Double Helix came out. However, when you look at cards like Firewall Dragon, even though they have soft once per turn effects, they're way too powerful, and I believe that a lot of these really powerful once per turn effects would instantly be fixed if we change them to once per duel. So I do believe that once per duel effects actually make the game more skillful, because they really force you to decide when the perfect opportunity to use an effect is, and if you waste it and you don't make the correct reads on either your opponent's back row or your opponent's hand, or you don't maximize the potential of that effect, well then you've lost because you're less skilled than your opponent, and I think that rewards good players. Now, another card game, Pokemon, actually has really doubled down on these once per duel effects, and I haven't played Pokemon for about 2 years, but basically they have these GX attacks, and the GX attacks can only be used once per game. No matter how many different Pokemon with GX attacks you have, you can only use 1 GX attack per game, and I believe that that's the same sort of line of thinking that I have with the once per duel effects. Nintendo saw that the Pokemon cards were getting a little too powerful, so they gave them once per duel effects so that they could print more powerful cards without totally throwing off the balance of the game. Just imagine a world where there were so many, if Firewall Dragon was once per duel, the card would still be played, but it wouldn't be able to be looped, and it wouldn't be able to make these huge boards that are unbeatable. And I think it's something for Konami to really think about. Now, I don't think they necessarily love making once per duel effects. If anything, they actively avoid them. I think that Glow Up Bulb and Spore were sort of the testing grounds for this. Cobra obviously has continued this trend. I don't know why these are all plant monsters, but the once per duel effect is severely underused. I don't know why Konami is avoiding doing this. I think they like effects, or they like decks that continuously make and break big boards, and if you made a deck of all once per duel effects, obviously it would have a really tough time. However, I do think from a design standpoint, It would be kind of interesting to make a deck with really good cards in it, but every single card is a once per duel effect. Would that be too complicated? Possibly. Another problem with once per duel effects from a gameplay standpoint is that there's the potential for people to cheat people. If you have a deck that's all once per duel effects and someone isn't keeping track of them, you leave the opportunity for one player to cheat their opponent by simply acting like they didn't realize that they used that once per duel effect. That might be one reason that Konami has sort of put the once per duel effects on the table for another day, but I think that the same issue can actually happen with hard once per turn effects and even soft once per turn effects, as we've seen in many live streams where people have done things like activate cards more than once without actually resetting them on the field. We've seen multiple Dragonic Diagram surges off of the same diagram in one turn. We've seen double normal summons. We've seen all sorts of cheats on live streams, so maybe that's not like the best example. So I don't know why Konami is avoiding these effects, but I really do think it would benefit the game if they added more once per duel effects. Now let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Maybe I've missed something, maybe I'm crazy. What sort of effects do you think should have been once per duel that would have made the game better for everyone involved? Maybe a card like Ash Blossom, maybe a card like Maxi, I don't know. Please let me know what your guys' thoughts are, and I will see you guys later. Bye.